Hello everyone. Just for a minute, imagine that you are a malware writer and you are planning to create your next malware. What are few things that you would consider when designing the next malware? The first thing you might consider is the target area. Now, target area varies based on the type of malware. For instance, an Android banker would target credit card details or banking credentials. But the target area for a ransomware would be something like files present on the system. So based on the type of malware you are creating, the target area would be different. You might think of making the malware stealthy, so that when the malware infects the victim, antivirus or anti-malware solutions do not catch it, or the malware is able to evade firewalls present on the network. You might think of how you want to spread the malware. You might create email messages with malicious attachments. You might either create a website, host the malware on that website and send download links, or you might send SMS messages from an infected device to the contacts present on the device in case of mobile malware. So there are many different ways in which you would spread a particular malware. Now there are two more factors that a lot of malware writers consider, but these factors are something that we do not normally associate with malware. These factors are human psychology and dark patterns in UI elements. In today's talk, I will highlight how these two factors are used by a lot of real-world malware to make these malware more dangerous and more effective. I will use Android malware examples to illustrate my point. Now you might think, why human psychology plays a vital role in malware design? Humans are an essential part in a lot of malware infections. Human intervention is needed at one step or the other to make a malware effective. Few examples of human intervention include opening an email and opening or saving the attachment locally on the device. Human intervention might be required in clicking or running an executable. It may be required in installing an application and running that application. So in a lot of cases, without human intervention, the malware will not infect the system. Because of this reason, malware writers study human behavior so that they can identify weakness in this behavior and exploit it. That is why human psychology plays a vital role in malware design. Next question you might think is how dark patterns or UI elements affect a malware. Now, dark pattern essentially means tricky components in UI which make an individual do something that the individual would normally not do. A very simple example of dark patterns is when you try to download something and you see a download now button, but it is surrounded by advertisements which also say download now. So as a user, you are confused which one is an actual button and which one is an advertisement which will lead you somewhere else. This is a very effective example of how UI element can be used to trick an individual. That is why UI is important in malware design. Now enough talk. Let's look at a few examples. I'll start with this very simple example, which I call the case of the missing icon. Android app drawer. In Android devices, whenever you install an application, you see an icon corresponding to that application in what is called the app drawer. So the app drawer lists icons for most of the applications present on the device, and you can start an application by clicking on this icon. So human behavior has led to believe that if an application exists on an Android device, there would be an icon for that application. Inversely, if an icon for an application is not present on the device, most likely that application is not present on the device as well. Malware writers exploit this behavior. Now in the next example, I will show what happens when I click on an icon belonging to an Android malware. Let's see what happens after that. As you can see, I'm opening the app drawer and I'm clicking on an icon called Flash Update. As soon as I click on this icon, I'm shown a notification saying app isn't installed. And after a few seconds, the icon vanishes from the app drawer. Now next, I inspect what applications are running on the device, and as you saw, I could see Flash Update among the running applications. So what happened in this example? This is a classic example that uses a psychological behavior: out of sight, out of mind. As soon as I clicked on the icon belonging to the malware, one of the first things it did was it made the icon disappear. As a result, the icon is out of sight. So a lot of users would be led to believe that the application is not present on the device anymore. The application also showed a notification saying the app isn't installed. A lot of users do not understand the fact that it was the malware that created that notification. So as you can see, the malware used both the elements, human psychology and clever UI, to make the user believe that the application is not present on the system. But in reality, it is running in the background doing what it was intended to do, and the user is not aware of that. Let's move to the next example, which is a potent ransom note. In this example, I will show ransom notes by two Android ransomwares. You get to decide which ransom note is more dangerous, is more potent, and more likely to get a ransom. This is the first example. And by the way, for all the examples I've used, I have listed the MD5 and the package name of the application so that you can have a look for yourself how these malware behave. So this is the first ransom note. As you can see, it has a lot of words, and it's basically saying that pornographic content was found on the device, because of which the device has now been locked. Now, what do you make of this ransom note? Is it potent? Well, to some extent, but still, I feel that this ransom note is quite generic in nature. Now, let's look at the second note. This ransom note is quite long. As a result, I have broken this note into 3 different screens. The first screen has a lot of words, just like the previous example. But what differentiates this ransomware from the previous one is what we see in screen number 2. When this malware executes on the device, it takes a picture from the front-facing camera of the victim and saves that image on the ransom note. That makes this ransom note quite customized as per the victim. The customization does not end here. If you look at screen number 3, this ransomware shows sensitive details about the victim. It shows details like the location where this device is present, the phone number, and the email associated with the device. These 2 things make the ransom note feel customized as per the victim. So, when you compare these two notes, which one do you think is more potent? Which one would fetch a ransom? I'm sure all of you would think example number 2 or malware number 2. Now, why is ransom note 2 more effective? One of the biggest reasons is because of the picture of the victim. There is a human psychological element involved here, which essentially states that humans tend to register data a lot more easily if that data contains word coupled with images versus a data which only contains words. This phenomenon is called picture superiority effect. So basically, if your data is coupled with images, it is more likely to stick in the mind of the readers. That's why I have used an image along with words in this slide. So, again, this is a good example of how malware uses the two factors that I mentioned earlier, human psychology and UI elements, to good use. UI elements in this example included the sensitive details about the victim that again made the victim feel that this ransom note is customized to him. Now, let's look at the third example, granting accessibility services. Accessibility services in Android is a feature that was created to help disabled people use the device more effectively. An application that has accessibility services permission is a lot more powerful than a regular application. Two examples of what an application with this privilege can do is, it can scan the screen and identify sensitive content and read those sensitive content to the user. Another example of what an application can do is that it can click on buttons on behalf of the user. Now, this was created to make the Android using experience more richer to someone with disabilities. But malware writers often misuse this permission. Now, two use cases of how a malware can misuse this permission are: it can scan the screen for sensitive content and either save this content locally or send it to the attacker. Another thing that an application can do is that it can click on buttons on behalf of the user. So in the background, a malware with this permission can install other rogue applications on the device without the user knowing about this particular action. So clearly, you can agree that a malware with this permission is a lot more dangerous than a malware which does not have this permission. And that is the reason why malware try to get access to this particular permission. Now in the next screen, I will show what happens when a malware which needs this permission is executed on a device. I'm sorry, before I go forward, I wanted to mention that even legitimate applications require this permission because it was created with a desire to make the Android using experience more friendly. So in this screen, you can see that when a legitimate application requires this permission, it has to explicitly mention that to the user. And the user has to manually grant this permission by going in settings. So Google has made it difficult for applications to gain this permission. And that makes sense because this is a very dangerous permission and users should have access or should have the control over which applications have this permission. So you can see that human intervention is needed to gain accessibility services permission. So this is an example of where I'm clicking on the app called Adobe Flash. And when I click on this app, I see a notification on top that Google services must be activated. So in short, the malware is asking me to grant accessibility services permission. And it has created a malicious service called Google Services. So again, you can see that both the factors, human psychology and UI, are being used to good effect. UI in the sense that the malicious service has a legitimate name. And I'll come to the psychological part soon. One thing that I forgot to mention is the fact that this screen keeps popping over and over if I do not grant this permission. So the malware is persistent. Now let's look at a more aggressive form of this malware. This is a different malware where, again, when I click on the icon, first it gives me a notification saying that enable access to Android services, I believe, Android security. So again, Android security is a malicious service created by the malware. And what makes this sample more aggressive is the fact that when I click on any other icon, it shows me the screen which requires or which is asking me to grant accessibility services permission. So basically, I cannot use the device anymore because no matter where I click, no matter what application I try to open, I am shown the screen belonging to accessibility services permission over and over and over. Even a device reboot will not work because as soon as the device gets rebooted, this malware is activated and I keep seeing the same screen over and over. Now, as I said earlier, UI elements are put to good use. These are two examples of how the malware creates malicious services and gives them legitimate names to convince the user to grant accessibility permissions to these particular services. So as you can see, UI elements are put to good use. Now comes the psychological part. Now anyone here with a toddler can easily relate with this behavior. If a toddler wants food or something else, he or she starts crying. And no matter what you do, the toddler will not stop crying until he or she gets what they want. This is called toddler temper tantrums, and that's exactly what the malware is doing in this case. It asks for accessibility services permission, and if the user does not grant those permission, it keeps showing the screen over and over and over. A layman user would feel that let me give access or let me give this permission and then I will see what I can do. But if the user gives the permission to the malware, it's too late. The malware has free rein to do whatever it wants on the device. And that's exactly what the malware wanted to do. It uses a psychological behavior to frustrate the user and gain the required permissions out of them. So again, the two factors were used very effectively in this case, more so compared to the previous two examples. So in conclusion, I can say that human psychology and dark patterns in UI play a very effective role in making a malware dangerous. In the examples I showed earlier, without these two factors, the malware would not have been that effective. So in some cases, how these factors are used can make a difference between infection and non-infection. I hope this talk sparks more conversation about how human psychology and UI elements are used in malware, because I feel these points are not discussed a lot. A lot of malware use these factors very effectively, but a lot of times we do not pay attention to this fact. Before I close, I would like to thank Cyber Threat Alliance and Virus Bulletin for giving me a platform to express my ideas. I hope this talk was useful in some ways to you. Thank you.